Good morning and welcome. I'm Faye Hartog-Levin, a member of the Board of Directors of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and we thank you for joining us for today's discussion, whether you are here or online. The Council aims to bring people together to foster a deeper understanding of global affairs, and we're honored to have Ambassador Michaelis here today to discuss global issues affecting the United States and Germany. Andreas Michaelis was appointed German Ambassador to the United States in August 2023, and over the course of his distinguished career in the German Foreign Service, he's held many roles, including Private Secretary to the Minister of State, Director for Asian and Pacific Affairs, Director for Near and Middle Eastern Affairs in North Africa, Political Director of the German Foreign Office, State Secretary twice. He also served as Ambassador to the Republic of Singapore 2002 to 2006, Ambassador to Israel 2011 to 2015, and Ambassador to the UK from 2020 to 2022. We will start today with our fireside chat, after which we'll have some time for Q&A with the audience. Before we begin, we would like to remind everyone that today's program is on the record, and any views expressed by the speakers we host here at the Council are their own and do not reflect any institutional positions. With that, we'll start with our Q&A, or with our fireside chat, excuse me. You've been ambassador in the States now for about 10 months. Can you tell us what your priorities have been and what has consumed a lot of your time?
Let me first say thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here in Chicago today. And that is also, in a way, part of the answer I can give, because I've been traveling a lot. If my staff compares it to previous ambassadors, and they would have liked probably to see me more often in the office than to be on the road. There is, I think, a very important reason why I started to travel far more than my predecessors. And that was that I had an impressive series of high-ranking visitors from Germany during my time. The president was here, the chancellor was here, foreign minister, the vice chancellor, minister of finance. It was almost like the full German cabinet in individual visits was here. And before I had started my job in Washington, we had sat together and we had discussed that it would make sense not to just focus on Washington, but to actually, when high-ranking visitors come to the US, to include another state. And many of those that visited have done exactly that. So Foreign Minister Baerbock went to Texas, and then Vice Chancellor Habeck actually went to Chicago and to Illinois and to New York, on top of going to Washington. So we really try to reach out very actively, because we understand that in terms of this important bilateral relationship, the pillars are not just the federal governments in Berlin and in Washington, but are actually the municipalities. I saw the mayor of Chicago this morning, and he very much agreed. We are organizing what we call an urban diplomacy conference in 2 weeks' time, which Mayor Adams and I host in New York, with an impressive number of German mayors that come to the US and mayors from the US that engage with them, in order to, if you want, make our relationship even wider and strengthen the pillars of this relationship. So if you ask what was your priority, it was exactly that, to be able to go around and convince people that it really makes sense to invest into that level of our relationship.
Great. Well, then we'll call you the frequent flyer, I guess. The United States and Germany have a robust trade relationship, and I understand that the United States recently overtook China as Germany's largest trade partner. How do you see potential American trade tariffs or protectionist policies affecting this trade relationship?
I should say that our economic relationship is mutually beneficial. Very clearly, that's where we are looking at a win-win. But I think we all have to admit that we find ourselves in a different international and global trade environment. On the one hand, free trade is not the rallying cry that shapes the trade realities around this globe very clearly. And I think we would be naive if we thought that, given the number of trade obstacles which we see, we would actually move back to a free trade reality as we enjoyed it, let's say, 20 years ago. That is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin really is that if you look at the various aspects of our relationship, and here I can say, from a German point of view, our relationship to the US, it's the most important bilateral relationship we have, because I need to discount relations within the European Union. That's more like our constitutional reality, the relationship with France, with Poland, etc. That's on a completely different level here. But the most important bilateral relationship is the one with the US, because of the security and defense implications, and certainly because of the economic implications. In security and defense, we have made a lot of progress recently. We've done a bit of homework. I think we should admit and say that we underperformed in that sector, and that we received a wake-up call when Russia attacked Ukraine, with all the consequences that entails. So defense and security, very important aspect. I think we are right there. We are working very closely. Then in foreign policy, as it comes to China, as it comes to the Indo-Pacific, for instance, we also established, I think I can say, a far more meaningful, because operational partnership with the US, something we haven't had when it came to the Indo-Pacific a couple of years ago. So that's also looking very well. Now, if that looks against, the challenge we are facing of authoritarian regimes, more and more regimes that challenge the rules-based international order, if we look at that, how important it is to stand together, I think we are slightly underperforming in the area of trade and our economic relationship, because we are not enjoying, let's say, the same stable platform that we enjoyed in the past. So I'm an optimist. I think that this issue can be addressed in the near future. It needs to be addressed very clearly, because if we don't stand firmly on that economic platform, it will be difficult for us to also perform at a very high quality level in the other areas that are important for our relationship. So for the next administration in the US, after the elections, starting next year, I think very clearly that is something which we will raise. And last remark about this, because the environment has so very much changed, we have to look at aspects, for instance, of economic security we were not looking at in the past, so that needs to be factored in. But the question is rather, are the responses, are the policies which we developed as a reaction to these challenges, in particular on the part of the European Union and of the US, are these just national reactions, or are we in a position to define a middle ground and maybe define a framework in which we are able to address these very legitimate and very urgent questions of economic security, for instance.
And you had mentioned to me earlier that the Ukraine war has affected the German economy. Can you explain that?
Well, I think here that's quite obvious, because we have, if I put it correctly, I think I can say we have a sluggish economy. We are clearly underperforming, given the potential of the German economy. We are not growing at the moment, or at a predicted rate that is so low that it doesn't match what characterized our economic growth and development in the recent past. And many of the factors that have contributed to this are related to the war in Ukraine. The first, I think, is clearly that we had to steer away. That was a political decision and an economic decision. We had to stay away from cheap Russian gas and oil over a very short period. So within 9 months, basically, we closed the tab. And that had, quite an extreme price hike as a consequence. I think that's obvious. And given that we are very much an industrial economy, that has affected our chemical industry, which is one of the backbones of the German economic model. That has affected other sectors of the economy that suddenly had to face very high prices. So that's one factor. There's another factor, because we are, and I say that, with a critical undertone or a self-critical undertone, we are very dependent on China still, given the exposure of German companies, for instance, in that market. The importance of that market, the investments in this market are they are absolutely still centrally important for the ability of the German economy to perform. And China has at the moment not the same vibrant economic performance they had in the past. So that slow growth has affected us. Now, if you draw a line, what's the consequence of all of that? The consequence, and that's something I'm observing when I travel in the US, when I meet German companies, that German companies now focus even more on the US market. So what really attracts them is some of them are really redirecting investments. Others have just decided that given, quite a, good growth in the US, that this is the time where they want to set up business here and be able to cater to the US market by producing here, for instance. So if you look at the position of Germany and foreign direct investment in various states, or you look at the national level, you find us in position 3 at national level, if I'm not mistaken, sometimes in 4, depends on how you count it. But there are states where we find ourselves clearly in the number 1 position. And that is, of course, very relevant for the job reality in these states, etc. I mean, BMW, not many people know this, I didn't know before I came here, is the largest car exporter of the US. Through its production in the state of South Carolina. So that gives you a feel for the kind of magnitude of the operations that are involved in that particular economic relationship.
Our Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, expressed concern about the overcapacity in China and that they might be flooding the market with cheap electric vehicles. Is that a factor in the German economy?
Well, that is something that worries us. And before coming here, it was my job to lead a team in drafting the first ever German China strategy in an interagency effort. And so we were deeply involved in many of these questions. It took us a whole year until we could present that draft to our cabinet that adopted it. And there are some insights, I think, that are very important. So we need to look at the risk exposure when it comes, for instance, to the presence of German companies in the Chinese market. And we need to look at the risk that is involved in being dependent, like the US does at the moment, dependent on Chinese products, for instance. So that's where I think we really start the game. And if I can give you an example, I think that illustrates the shift that will be important. In the past, we were certainly looking at imbalances in the trade relationship between us and China. But we were not doing this strictly. We were not doing this in a symmetrical fashion. The Chinese, for instance, and you yourself, Ambassador, you served in the Netherlands, they bought ports and parts of ports all over Europe, reaching from Greece all the way to Northern Europe. And that is something which we can't do when we go to China. You know, you can't invest into Chinese port infrastructure. That's a total no-go. In the past, I think, we simply accepted that. We thought, you know, there's another kind of balance that is relevant for us and that will create a positive business case for us. I think we have to be far more symmetrical now. We need to establish what we call a level playing field. And so there is not a discount approach to that kind of trade relationship, which we would like to enjoy with China. So from that point of view, overcapacity is an issue. It's very difficult to measure it. The European Union, the Commission, will soon come up with a study that will be important for the kind of political decision that needs to be prepared there on overcapacity, especially in the EV sector. Here, when it comes to EVs, you know, I could observe that when the tariffs were recently announced, the tariff hike on EVs from China here in the US, all the way up to 100%. If I'm not mistaken, the German car industry remained slightly relaxed about this because the volume is relatively small. They have pursued for a long time a kind of local for local strategy. So they produce in the US for the US market, they produce in China for the Chinese market. But, you know, do they feel comfortable? I would say no, they don't feel comfortable because it's always irritating if somebody who's not part of your body politic takes a decision that is so far reaching that affects you deeply, and that is something which you sense. Are they more relaxed than our French friends on the other side of the Rhine? I think they still are because they see themselves producing cars in the luxury segment, which is not as easily outperformed by Chinese EVs, but they may get that totally wrong. So we will see how the Chinese will respond to this and how they behave vis-à-vis Europe. I can assure you that here we are not naive anymore. We are very, very focused. And we will take the political decisions we need to take on the basis of the things we see and on the basis of our analysis, I think.
Thank you. Let's just switch to Israel for a minute and what's going on there, because you served there twice. Yeah. And Germany and the United States are among the biggest allies of Israel. Yeah. What's your view on the role that Germany and the United States could take in trying to resolve things, and has the war there created more anti-Semitism in Europe as it has here?
Yeah, I can only say it has, you know, huge impact, what has happened on the 7th of October. And sometimes I ask myself, I mean, it's always difficult to make these comparisons. Is that far-reaching, more far-reaching than what has started with the attack of Russia on Ukraine? I think it's difficult, but there are things that are extremely worrisome. Because if you look at what has happened on the 7th of October last year, we need to look at this through German eyes, you know, with all the weight of our history on our shoulders. That was almost like Einsatzgruppe A or Einsatzgruppe B is, you know, having a good time in Ukraine. That attack of Hamas on the kibbutzim next to Gaza and on the Nova Festival, that was deeply, deeply emotionally irritating. Not just, of course, you know, for our Israeli friends and partners, but for us too, in a way, because, you know, to the extent possible, we had decided, I can say my generation, you know, the generations of those Germans were the children of parents that still, you know, experienced the war. or fought in the war, that this will not happen again, and that it is absolutely key to avoid it, but suddenly it had happened. And so I may be wrong here, but I think it's poisonous for the roots and foundations of the State of Israel that this kind of security guarantee and security understanding was breached in the way it was breached. So now we have to, I think, look at all questions. The question of what happens, how does the military campaign look like in the Gaza Strip? What happens in international fora? What happens to the Israeli economy that suffers heavily in this situation? I think we have to look at all these aspects very much in the context of that much, kind of more comprehensive challenge that Israel is facing, which some say really is a question about the foundations of the State of Israel. So this is a very, very serious moment. If it wasn't for the US and for Germany to act as responsible allies here, and responsible now, I mean, that would take us probably a whole evening to discuss what is involved in this when you look at individual examples. But that's certainly what we would like to achieve. And you've just made that comparison. You've said, here are two major allies of Israel, Germany and the US. I think that's important to see right now, that when you look at the most critical areas of international confrontations and crises and wars, it is the US and Germany that function in very close coordination, what I call operational, that function as partner 1 and 2, with a big distance, of course, in terms of the capability. But when you look at Ukraine, most important supporter here is the US, second most important and very substantial supporter. Military assistance, financial assistance, political assistance by opening the gates of the European Union for membership, for instance, for Ukraine. Often underestimated in its importance. So here's Germany. When it comes to Israel, it is a similar situation. And I can simply say, we would like to do this solidarity and this close partnership with Israel. We would like to live it in the most responsible way. That may also include, without, kind of appearing as the I know it all expert, which we understand we don't want to be, because there are so many things involved. But sometimes in our confidential dialogue, I think we ask questions that are maybe not so comfortable for the Israeli government to be asked, and where, it's not so easy to find the answer to. But we find very much that you have to be very careful to preserve the legitimacy and, let's say, this wonderful democratic quality of the State of Israel and the values and principles this state stands for. And those need to be defended. If they are compromised under the present circumstances in substance, right, and not just rhetorically, I think that's dangerous for Israel. And that's where we also warn. That's where we, as partners, say what we think.
Yeah. We are experiencing here in our younger generations a lot of concern for the Palestinians. Is that also occurring in Germany?
Yeah.
Around
Probably not, I feel like there are more, campuses where this is an issue in the US, but there are campuses in Germany where it is an issue. And as you can observe, we have now a very, significant minority in the country with an Middle Eastern background and that with Muslim beliefs, etc., which may be instinctively more ready to identify with a Palestinian cause. This by itself is not a challenge. The challenge comes when that turns into anti-Semitism, when that and that's something I'm personally very concerned about, when they block their natural access to the emotional dimension, and emotional now in political terms of what has happened. You have to put yourself into the shoes of those people that lost their closest in the attack of Hamas. And I must say, I'm very happy that I could still, in a way, being ambassador here in the US, being in Washington, stay in touch, because we're also looking at Germans here. Many of the hostages, a significant number of them, are double nationals, and not just US Israeli, but German Israeli. Many of the victims are German Israeli. And that is probably something which we have not fully acknowledged at home, right? We're not looking at, what is happening there as having lost, some of ours in that attack. And that is what I mean by the emotional political dimension of the whole thing. That needs to be very present, I think.
Thank you. One more question that has to do with Germany's noted policy on the welcoming of asylum seekers that I think became well known in 2015 with the influx of Syrian refugees and in 2022 with the Ukrainian refugees. Right. Can you maybe talk a little bit how that has affected the culture or the refugees? Have they been assimilated and so on?
Yeah, I think that's, clearly there has so many aspects. I mean, one aspect, I think, that is important to be aware of in this context is that also in Germany we've had, during the last years and during the last months, very much an increase of right-wing populist parties in the country. Now, whatever you feel, whatever you think about what has happened in terms of migration, that's instrumentalized by these parties, right? By kind of preparing an argument that says that whatever goes wrong, whatever families perceive as not being okay with them, is somehow related to the migration issue. And to a certain extent, it looks like that works, because they've really, on the basis of the polls and recent local and state elections, they have performed quite well. And there are 3 very important state elections in September in Germany, all of them in the east of the country. And at the moment, I think, we are in the best of democratic confrontations here with these forces. But these forces, and that's important, very much feed on the realities of migration. That is one. Second, we had 2 big waves of immigration to Germany. One in 2015, Syrian war refugees, more than 1 million that came to Germany and stayed. And in 22, after the attack of Russia on Ukraine, we took in 1.1 million Ukrainian refugees. Now, it's interesting to see how the population in Germany reacted to it. Now, take the most recent example of the Ukrainian wave. There was just not enough living or available housing to put them up. And in the first weeks and months, there was a very high proportion, it was totally moving, of German families that opened the doors of their houses, of their apartments, and took on Ukrainian refugees, sometimes for half a year. I mean, people who live in a 3-room apartment and give 1 room to a Ukrainian family. That's what happened there. Very, very important to kind of make sure And that's why, if you look at the polls in Europe, I think when you look at Germany and ask the question about how do you feel about the war in Ukraine, there is a very good understanding of what is involved for the Ukrainians here, because many know the Ukrainian family down the road that lives in your neighborhood. I think that has a very, very important political role. Now, with the Syrian migration, or with a number of mainly Syrians, I think we are not doing. Yeah, we're doing, that's my personal, given the challenge, we are just 84 million Germans. I think we're doing okay in terms of the language programs we rolled out, etc., the integration. But as always, it always gets you to a point where you say, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? I find it quite amazing very often that the glass is half full at all. Given the difficulty of absorbing people. One thing that has really helped us, and that is something that struck me when I arrived in the US, is that we have an agreed quota, how we distribute migrants in Germany. Never mind how many arrive, they will be distributed in the country and registered at local level, so that it doesn't create imbalances, that the absorption capacity in individual parts of the country is not overburdened. Now, that is something where I don't fully understand how that works here in the US. Obviously, you have an issue here.
They don't get work permits, the asylum seekers.
Well, in the initial phase of their asylum procedure, they don't, but they get, and that is something where Ukrainian refugees in Germany have a different status. They're not asylum seekers, so they are in a different category, so they can find work. And many of them are also very qualified. Then other groups of migrants, if they are asylum seekers, then during the actual procedure, they receive a very, very, I would say, adequate and good package of social benefit that makes it possible for them not to work. But then we all understand, and we are in a discussion at the moment of actually rethinking this, because if you want to really absorb them, you may not want to wait 2 or 3 years before you take them out of an asylum home and then try to integrate them into society again. So these are all kind of social engineering, and this is a delicate and difficult task anyways, aspects that most people, most countries actually face that deal with migration at the moment, right?
Thank you. One big picture question before we go to the question and answer portion of this program, which is, do you see areas of cooperation for the United States and Germany that could really grow, new or different? What areas would you see?
Now, there are, to start with, really, really important and attractive high-tech areas. I've just visited NASA 2 days ago. Fusion, for instance, is an area that will soon become very relevant in terms also of application, artificial intelligence. We are not as good as the US in actually turning that into concrete business propositions, but we are very good at academic level. So there are areas where we can very much improve our cooperation. And there are so many other sectors when it comes to our industry and our cooperation where it matters. Just one figure, because I think that's very important. This is also about what the US does in Germany, and we have seen very, very substantial US investments in Germany recently in the field of semiconductors, etc., very much welcomed. And Germany has now become the most important destination of foreign direct investment in the European Union. So I think that also speaks for itself. I'm not worried about the win-win. I think we share principles. We are allies. There are so many political reasons why we can and should cooperate. But if there are people who are more level-headed, who are not, too much moved, let's say, by that principled, softer stuff, who are looking for the hard figures, we are creating win-win in so many areas, and that I think speaks for itself and needs to continue. I only learned coming here that German companies created 50,000 jobs in the wider Chicago, Illinois area. That's a strong argument, isn't it? Right?
Thank you. I think it's time to go to the audience Q&A. I would ask that you identify yourself and go to the microphone. Thank you. I'll start with one question online here while people are lining up, which is from our online audience. How would you assess the importance of German industry and trade to the U.S. economy versus other partners such as Mexico, Canada, China, Japan? And we have a lot of questions, so we'll make it quick.
I will try to be as short as possible. Of course, difficult to compare it to Canada and Mexico because that's in a free trade agreement context. So that's slightly different. But I would say what we have in common is that we have a very broad product base and service base that is relevant. So almost all aspects of the German economy are engaged when it comes to the relationship with the US. And I think the same is true of Canada and of Mexico.
Okay, thank you. First question here.
I'm a resident of Chicago. My name's Kenneth Newman. And I've been all over Europe traveling. I would like to know, do you feel that the German and other European munitions factories are being able to keep up with their share of providing munitions for Ukraine and also for Poland and the Baltic states, which are the front line against Russia?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And my first answer, because I believe we can't give enough ammunition to Ukraine, is certainly no. So we can't keep up at the moment. But have we been able to manage the turnaround? I think we have. I work for government for more than 30 years, and I had probably never thought that one day I would find myself in what we called an ammunition summit at the Chancellor's office, right? But here I was discussing with my colleagues how we can set an impulse for more and new production. I think we managed to do that because we could convince German defense actors to start new production, not necessarily always in Germany, also in Germany, but sometimes, for instance, in Hungary. So there are German companies that have now started to produce more ammunition, and that's, I think, the most important message I need to share with you, that we have to back our Ukrainian friends with everything we have in 24. This is where most of the energy, almost like physical energy, needs to go. I'm not saying that 25, 26, 27 will be easy if we need to go through those years with this war, but it will be under different premises, better premises, I hope, because some of the downsides that have stopped us from providing systems and equipment, for instance, will have been addressed. I think that's where we are.
Thank you. Can we take maybe a couple of questions at a time so that we can get everybody there? Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is David Huber, and I live in Chicago. And my question is, I've heard reporting of the German state using judicial means to go after political parties like the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland. How do you speak to that? Because it sounds like it's lawfare, and with the elections coming up, European elections, et cetera, it seems to be this sort of a proactive response to sort of suppress popular support for these parties? Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Sure. Hello, my name's Rick. My question, I've been an expat in your country. I have a deep appreciation for the German people. One of the things I admire most is your circular economy and your drive for sustainability. What tactics are you doing, both formally and informally, to help bring some of that sustainability to the United States?
Thank you. We'll take one more. Ellen.
Alan Rich. I've been involved in German-Jewish relations and German-American relations for the last 35 years. And I would agree with the ambassador that there's no more critical relationship than the relationship between the United States and Germany. And Israel certainly has no closer partners than the United States and Germany. We live in deeply troubling times, no question about that. My question is more granular, though. The chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court has called for the ability to issue the court to order arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, as well as 3 Hamas leaders. The German government has indicated, although it's a hypothetical at this point, that they would honor those arrest warrants if in fact they were issued. Do you have any comment on that, especially in light of the fact of German leaders repeatedly indicating that they know what genocide is and what Israel is committing today is not genocide? Thank you.
You want to take a...
Thank you for all these easy questions.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Huber, are we after the AfD? If the AfD crosses the legal boundaries, our judiciary is certainly after them. Prosecutors are after them. There are various areas. They're candidate now in the European, or like the top candidate in the European elections. He's obviously engaged in a number of activities that are legally more than problematic, so they need to be addressed. But I understand you are probably more asking also about free speech aspects, etc. And here, I think you find a very unique reality in Germany because of our past, we decided that symbols, and they're very clearly defined, and quotes, speech that is related to Nazi activities or Nazi positions, Nazi philosophy, etc., is simply illegal. So in Germany, you can't raise your arm and do a Hitler salute, right? And that is something which we have accepted, which Germans have accepted for decades. So if suddenly there come people, and you may have seen, some of you may have seen, there was a group of youngsters that was celebrating on the island of Sylt, and they were kind of mocking the salute because they want to be very smart. They say, this is the salute in a redefined way, etc. That's something our legal authorities will be dealing with, including quoting, for instance, and making reference to very, very unique portions of Nazi rhetoric that is being used in, let's say, the free speech of some of the representatives of the party. But it's not a murky area. It's not a gray area. Everything is transparent. You know exactly where freedom of speech ends and where illegal activity starts. And that needs to be observed, whether these are parties that operate on the left or parties that operate on the right. I think that's very, very important. Then sustainability. I think there are many, many and thank you for the questions, because we are very focused on ecological transition in Germany. And our policy is geared to it because we fully understand that the challenges we face in terms of climate policy are global. by definition. So we need to actually discuss with partners and with countries that don't have the means to adopt relevant policies, how we can move forward and do the steps which we think are right. So we have a dialogue, of course, with the US. We have dialogue with individual states. But what really matters at the end of it, because I understand, look, for instance, at Texas. Texas is number 1 or number 2 in wind energy in the US. Not necessarily because at some point they embraced the concept of being number 1 or being number 2, but market forces simply, created a reality that they are. And here we are not choosy, I think. If the right result is being produced by a market effect, tally ho, chums, right? That's good for us. And that's why it is important that German companies are involved in this. And I've just recently visited Siemens Energy, for instance. I mean, these are actors, business actors that are very important for the overall effort of moving towards a more sustainable reality, also here in the US. Okay. Now that more granular question about the International Criminal Court. I think first you need to distinguish, because that's pretty recent still, the 2 arrest warrants, or not more than 2, we are looking at 4, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 5 arrest warrants. Before that, there was the question that needs to be dealt with in the kind of main case by the International Court of Justice, and not just by the International Criminal Court, the question of whether Israel commits genocide or doesn't commit genocide. So we will see. We have said we will offer our opinion to the court. And I think that's not unimportant because, in all modesty, I can say that, Germany's legal opinion in international court cases is very much respected, I think. And we have said what we can't see is, and that is one of the preconditions for actually arriving at a conclusion that would assume genocide, is that you have to act with genocidal intent. And we say, we can't see that. We can't see that, right? And I must say, personally, with all the many years that I lived in this country, I would find it impossible really to imagine that, this is happening. So that's one side. That's one side. The other question, and here I can only say that's difficult for a country like Germany, because for all the obvious reasons, because we wanted to think of the Balkan Wars, for instance. We wanted to be after war criminals. We didn't want them to go free, also against the backdrop of our own history. And that's why, from the very beginning, we were instrumental in creating an international criminal court, and we are very much supporting the institution. So how that will affect how we act if that court were finally to actually agree on the arrest warrants, that's something we will see. Here, I don't say we're not doing it, and I'm not saying, we will automatically follow it. I think we will do it out of deep respect also for that institution. And that is clearly a difference. That's a major difference vis-a-vis the US, because here I hear a lot of talk about sanctioning the International Criminal Court, etc. Now, clearly, that's not a road we will take, but we act out of respect for the court. Yes, there has been an application by the chief prosecutor, but for me, at this point, it's too iffy to go into the question of how we will react, because there are no approved arrest warrants at this point of time.
I am sorry that we are out of time and have gone over. Perhaps the ambassador can stay a few more minutes to speak to those people who didn't have a chance to ask the question. But please join me in thanking Ambassador Michaelis for being with us today.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.